Dan and I and Wendy actually were talking about this last week, and we were saying that we thought that it would be a good idea to go through some of the kind of key stuff around self-management and what we're doing and how we're working and what open culture is. And actually, we felt that what we wanted to do was a kind of series of presentations on what we're calling the GrantTree Fundamentals. Now, actually, we think that probably there is an ongoing piece of work for us to understand what this stuff is and to check that what we're doing is in line with it. I've been reading Joy at Work, which is the book about AES, which are one of the kind of pioneering organisations in open culture. And one of the things that Dennis Backer says in that, Dennis Backer was the CEO who brought in the ideas and actually invented the advice process, which we'll talk about today, was that actually a lot of what he did as CEO of AES was go around explaining the values of the organisation. Because when you have unusual and complicated things like the advice process and a value-driven organisation, to make sure that we're all on the same page about how that works, and then to make sure that we're kind of applying it when we've all got other stuff to be doing, is like an ongoing challenge. So it's a series of presentations, but it's kind of the start of ongoing work for us to understand what we're doing. So we're talking about the GrantTree Fundamentals, but an idea that I want to introduce is this idea of the constitutional core. So there is a kind of core of stuff which applies in GrantTree across the business and across all aspects of what we do. And in its current form, we all have to be willing to subscribe to it, right? And this is one of the sort of, this is a little bit of a paradox of self-management, because we're saying we want everybody to be as free as possible, but in order to preserve that freedom, there need to be certain things that we all subscribe to. I mean, we have the opportunity to change them through the advice process, but things like the values, the mission, and then kind of core process like the advice process, we all need to be willing to work with as they currently stand.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting parallel with democracy, actually, which a lot of people misunderstand democracy and say, well, democracy means people vote on stuff. That's a really, really restricted and diluted meaning of democracy. Democracy is a whole system of systems, a number of institutions that work together and support each other to create an environment where a free country can actually exist. So you've got things like the rule of law, you've got things like freedom of the press and freedom of expression, and you've got the separation of powers. You've got a number of things like this that you kind of have to subscribe to all of those for democracy to work. And there's a similar effect at play with something like teal cultures, where the goal is a free country or a free company, but in order for the company to be free, there are certain rules, certain institutions that need to function. And if those institutions don't function, then you don't actually have a free country or a free company, you have something less. And that's what we're going to cover in those fundamentals, starting with the advice process.
Yeah. So I think it's worth just starting by saying, open culture and what we mean by open culture and the kind of key assumptions that underlie it, because everything else kind of comes from these things. So open culture, the first thing about open culture is trust. There was Jay, we were talking about this yesterday, what's the name of that management theorist? Theory X, Theory Y? McGregor, right, okay, so he has these two approaches to management. Theory X assumes that people aren't interested in their work. They need to be told what to do, they're untrustworthy, they're unmotivated. Theory Y says that people are intrinsically motivated, they're excited, they'll do a good job if you only encourage them. And one of the interesting things that he found in his research was that the more you espouse Theory Y, in other words, the more trust you put in people, the more people will behave as you would like people to behave so that you could trust them, if that makes sense. So trust begets trust, and fear begets fear. So all of open culture is built around trust, and we have to keep an eye on what we're doing and saying, are the processes that we're building, are the values that we're working with, are the things that we're doing every day working towards more trust? Because as soon as we start working with fear and introducing that and eroding trust, then we start to see, people gaming the system, and so the less you trust, the more negative behaviour you see. The second thing is freedom. So this is like an important concept. We talk about non-violent communication and things like this, and because to me the opposite of freedom is violence, right? It's coercion. It's the traditional model of management in which somebody is using power to tell you what you can and can't do. So open culture is built on freedom, and open culture is also about power, but changing power from a scarce resource, which is how it is in a hierarchical organization, it's concentrated in a few people at the top of the company, to an abundant resource. So the idea in open culture is that everybody has as much power as they need. And yeah, that's or as they put it at AES, you know, every person a business person. So you have the power to make the decision that you want. Dan tells me not for pressing the keys too hard. But, oh, okay, there we go. Oh yeah, so this is an important point. Defend your constitutionally protected rights. No one else will do it for you. Right? These are the things that we're trying to do with open culture: power and, you know, making power more abundant, freedom and trust. But the only way we can make that work is if we all make an effort to make that happen. You know, so we all have to take responsibility for our own actions and make sure that we're promoting those things and we're not eroding them. But we also have to take responsibility for each other and seeing if other people are doing things that we say, well, that's, you know, that's not in line with the rules of the advice process, or your behaviour here seems not to be very trusting. And because if we don't do that, then we start to erode it. So if we want the system to work, then we all have to be prepared to protect the system.
It's kind of like so even without any kind of malicious intent, people will naturally fall back to using various tools of, like, you know, peer pressure and various forms of what I would call coercion, which is a fairly negative term, but never mind. People will use that in communication, trying to convince each other to do stuff. And that doesn't mean there's a malicious intent from the person, but if you're on the receiving end of that, it is your responsibility to stand up for yourself and say, hey, like, you know, hold on, I feel like I'm being pressured into this, and, for example, I took on this decision, I'm supposed to be the decision maker, can you please stop pressuring me? And if the person refuses to stop pressuring me, for example, you need to be the one who goes and raises that and defends yourself. We can create an environment where this can happen, but it's not possible to create an environment where this happens and to defend everybody's rights for them. Ultimately, we all have a responsibility to defend our own rights and privileges in this organization.
Yeah, and so I mean, you know, it's reasonable to turn to other people for support. So if you think, oh, I see this other person's behaviour, and I'm not sure if actually this is eroding my rights, eroding open culture, then, you know, talk to somebody else about it. Obviously, talk to me or when you're down, but talk to anybody about it, and get support to kind of to challenge that. These are the various bits that at the moment we think are kind of part of the constitutional core. I mean, these are the things that kind of apply to everything that we do and equally across the business. Values, purpose, advice process, trust building, roles, resolution, and today we'll talk about advice process. What is the advice process? The advice process is how we make all decisions at GrantTree, right? So every decision that we make is an advice process decision, no matter how big or how large. How big or how small, sorry. And this is the fundamental principle. Anybody can make any decision on behalf of the business, provided they seek advice from those impacted or with expertise. So hopefully that's familiar to everyone. We've been saying that for a while. And really the purpose of this presentation is to explore a little bit more kind of what that means and why it is that we have it and what the mechanics of the process are. So the reason why we have the advice process is that those two fundamental building blocks are trust and power, right? If we want to make power an abundant resource, which is what self-management is, right? If we say, okay, we're a self-managing business, what does that mean? It means that people are free to make decisions and take action on the basis of those decisions themselves, right? We don't have self-management unless we have the freedom to decide and act. And we have the freedom to decide and act because we use the advice process. So the advice process is the thing that makes power an abundant resource. I mean, the reason I'm labouring this point is I think it's really important, right? This is the absolute cornerstone of open culture and self-management. So there are advantages to working with the advice model of saying you can go and you can make a decision if you seek advice. One is it's an opportunity for you to learn. I mean, it's not only in the sense that, you know, if I want to, like, you know, when we made a decision about buying the webcam, you learn a little bit about good webcams and bad webcams. Like, I know that, you know, Jabra is the best technology if I want to buy a Bluetooth speaker, right? So you learn some stuff, but you also actually learn about making decisions and running a business. You know, every decision that you make is you exercising your power and becoming more comfortable with that. So it's an opportunity to learn and grow. It's also an opportunity to build relationships, because going out and asking for advice from people, saying to them, okay, here's something, I would like to know about this, maybe you know more about it than I do. That's a relationship building experience for both the person seeking advice and the person giving advice. It's, yeah, as I've already said, it's the way in which we build our power and our responsibility. But there's also, I think, this concept of joy or fulfillment. We have the opportunity to go and have that freedom to do things for ourselves, the more fulfilling work becomes. You know, this is the thing, for me, that distinguishes work that's satisfying from work that's unsatisfying, is, you know, how free am I to do stuff? How free am I to use my own personal skills and talents and to kind of, you know, have the opportunity to realise them. So, the nitty-gritty of the process.
And just one thing, we know that everybody is aware roughly of how the advice process functions, but we thought as a precursor to discussing the rules, the rule changes, which we were supposed to discuss today, but we realized that this is a thing, so the advice process is a thing that needs to be really properly in place and really understood, because the rule changes then kind of flow out of it. So we decided to sort of re-clarify. Because the last time I think we discussed the advice process like this was probably a year ago, and half the people in this room weren't here a year ago. So it's really worth re-explaining that and writing it down and like really clarifying it and making sure that there is a joint understanding of this. That's why we're covering all ground. Yeah. And we'll probably cover it again and again until it's completely accepted.
I mean, we've also learned stuff about it in the last year, right? Because we've been applying it. So, and we will continue to learn stuff about it as time goes on. So our understanding will evolve. So, one willing decision maker, right? So you can't be forced to make a decision. You have to be prepared to do it. And one of the reasons why is because you're taking responsibility for the decision and its consequences. So you should only take on responsibility for making decisions where you're comfortable with both of those things. Right? And remember that, I mean, the consequences where it's going to bite, the consequences where it's going to go wrong. And that's how we, you know, that's how we grow our power, with our power and responsibility. It has to be one person, and with very few exceptions. So the reason why we say it has to be one person, firstly it's about saying, firstly it's about clarity. Right? On any issue we should be able to say who's the decision maker, and we should be able to point at one person. Now that makes it very easy for everyone else in the business to say, oh, if I want to provide advice on this decision, I know who to talk to. Or if this decision is made and I'm not happy about it, I want to have some clarification about why it was made, you know, I know who to go to. Or if there are consequences that need to be dealt with down the line, we know who to turn to. It's also about saying, if we dilute this and start to say that, you know, multiple people are making a decision, where does the responsibility lie? You know, we've talked about this, I think, around, I remember when we were making some hiring decisions, and it was like, well, who's actually making this hiring decision? Because a hire is a big decision, right? It's a big decision to bring somebody into the business, for them, for us, financially, culturally, right? All of that kind of stuff. So one person needs to really feel the weight and responsibility of that decision. And the more we have decision making by committee, the easier it is for kind of nobody to end up, you know, feeling the weight of that decision. Was there anything else about what? Oh yeah, we were saying. We know that with the pay task forces, we have made a principled exception to that and said that it's a group decision. And there might be other circumstances where we might want to do that, where we say there's, you know, a clearly negative impact if one person had to be responsible for this. But by and large, my advice would be we should try and stick to saying it's one person, even if it's a task force or a meeting. And actually in a task force or meeting, it can be quite powerful to say, okay, you know, this is a decision that we're trying to make in this meeting, and rather than try and make it as a group, let's pick one person in the meeting to make the decision, the rest of us can present our advice, and then we move on to the next thing. So it's kind of more efficient. I mean, if you look at the stuff in Joy at Work, or you look at the stuff in Reinventing Organizations, or any of the kind of other literature where people talk about the advice process, they say one of the things that make it such a powerful process is it's efficient. You know, it's not consensus driven, so you don't have to endlessly go back and forwards and incorporate everyone's point of view, and you have the opportunity to say, okay, one person will navigate everybody's point of view and make what they think is the best decision.
I have had here that as a really great example of that. Yesterday we had the paid trustees meeting, and whenever there was a controversial decision, somebody where we weren't sure, we elected one person to make the decision on that, the most neutral person in the group. And then everyone else presented their thoughts, like how they felt about this particular decision, and then that neutral person made the decision. And this is how I think we had probably one of the most efficient 3-hour meetings in the company's existence, if not the most efficient. I mean, we basically went through the entire list of people and did everything, and I think we finished 20 minutes early, which was kind of mind-blowing and incredibly tiring as well. But it works even for very sensitive topics, even with the person whose feedback is being delivered in the room right there in the meeting. It's a very powerful way to run meetings where there are decisions to be made. Much better than trying to get everybody to agree and everything.
So to kick off any advice process, you need to know what the decision has been made, who's making the decision, and what the impact of the decision is. Oh yeah, okay, we covered that. Brilliant. So in terms of getting advice, it's an active process to go out and get all the advice that you need. You're going to be making the decision, so the question is, do you have available, everything that you want? Are you putting yourself in the best possible position? And I think it is a really nice, in Joy at Work, when they talk about the advice processes, it's a learning experience. It's an opportunity to learn. And personally, I really like that. I think that's kind of beautiful way of looking at it. You're thinking, oh, this is an opportunity for me to kind of engage my curiosity and an opportunity to go out there and practice open-mindedness and to understand how other people are looking at the world and to interrogate other people's expertise. You should be seeking advice from anybody who's impacted by the decision, and from experts, and the kind of standard range of experts would be obviously if we're buying some technical equipment or whatever, going to people with technical expertise, or have financial expertise in terms of thinking of the weighing up the costs and the benefits of a proposal. Obviously when Sheehan starts, there'll be somebody in-house who can help with that. And the bigger the decision or the bigger the spend, the more the wider you should cast the net for the advice. So there's no hard and fast rule that says, if you want to spend this amount of money, you have to consult this many people. Or these are the decisions where you should, consult the whole company, these are the decisions. We rely, remember the whole thing relies on trust. So we rely on everybody to be acting in good faith and to have the interests of the company at heart as well as their own interests, and to make an informed and sensible decision about how widely they should be consulted.
Yeah, and so it is the person's responsibility, and that means that they end up facing the consequences of not consulting the right people, which may just be something as simple as the person speaking up and saying, hey, I'd like to provide my advice as well. Or the consequence may be that because you didn't get the one crucial piece of advice, you make an incorrect decision, and then you have to deal with the consequences of that. So it is important to think about who should I consult for this, and make sure you actually get their advice if they're busy and so on, to actually go and actively approach them.
It's important to allow sufficient time. So again, the bigger the decision, the longer that you should give, so that people have a chance to consider it, and so that you have the chance to get all the feedback. But remember that you don't have to incorporate all, or indeed actually any, of the advice that you receive, but you do have to listen to it. That's really the crucial thing. You have to go out and seek the advice, and you have to seriously consider it. Not seeking advice when you should have done and not considering the advice would definitely be a breach of the process. Oh yeah, it helps to acknowledge it, does it? So if people have given you advice, particularly if you're not going to take it, it's a really good thing, remembering that one of the things the advice process does is it allows you to build relationships, is to say, oh, even if it's just saying, a quick email saying thanks for that. But sometimes at the end it can be really helpful if someone said to you, I think this is a really bad idea, for you to say, well actually, separately to telling everyone else about your decision, I've not taken your advice, this was my reasoning, because that makes it easier for them to then support your decision, because one of the things on the latest slide is every decision once it's been made becomes the decision of the business. You know, it doesn't matter who made it. Once it's made, that's the decision that we all have to work with. So actually explaining to people who gave you contradictory advice makes it easier for them to, you know, to join in. Who do you consult? Yeah, we've talked about who you consult. Email proposals. The email proposals are a great tool that we have to reach out to the whole business, but they're not. I just really wanted to make this point that the hashtag advice email is not equivalent to the advice process. It is a tool that's available to consult, and sometimes if you do need to reach out to the whole business, it's the best way to do it. But you know, a few things to think about are, you know, if your email takes, you know, 2 minutes to read or 3 minutes to read and respond to whatever, and you're sending it to 25 people, that's 75 minutes of kind of consultation time. So sometimes it's worth thinking, you know, do I need to ask the whole company this? Or actually, would it be better for me to go and talk to 2 or 3 people and get like 15 minutes of dialogue with them, and then really that gives me the clarity that I need. What information do you need to provide? Yeah, so in getting advice, you want to provide people with the most complete picture that you have at this point in time, so that you're effectively saying to them, look, if you were making this decision, what would you do? So they have as much information as you do going into that process, that allows them to give you the best possible advice. Because the advisors do have a responsibility. The process relies on getting robust advice. And I think it's worth saying that advice doesn't just have to be, you know, an opinion. Yes, I would do it this way, or you should think about this. Sometimes the best advice comes in the form of questions. And actually asking tough and relevant questions, but like, you know, genuine, not leading questions, genuinely, have you thought about this? Is there a reason why you're doing it this way? Is the thing that will help us make the best decisions in the business. We've talked before about, you know, when we use email proposals, we try and say, please, BCC team, so that it's not a reply to the list. And we've talked before about the fact that when feedback is given on a proposal kind of publicly, there's the risk of it becoming a political issue. You know, you see that 3 or 4 other people have said, oh, this seems like a great idea, and suddenly there's a peer pressure situation, and it becomes harder for you to say, well, actually, I don't think this is such a good idea, my reasons. So, generally speaking, it's best to just have some sensitivity to think about, is it better to give feedback privately? Although, you know, sometimes in the context of a meeting, you have to give it publicly, and it can work. It's not like a disaster.
We've had the pay trustees meeting was another example. There was lots of very sensitive feedback delivered publicly. It did not get political, and the reason, I think, was because the feedback was being delivered in a respectful manner, respecting the right of the decision maker to make the decision. And so if the discussion starts to get political, it's probably something worth bearing in mind. Maybe, so if you're part of the discussion, you can see it getting political, maybe try and make sure your feedback, you keep in mind that it is the decision maker's decision, and that all you're doing is providing feedback and not trying to gain support for your side of the argument and stuff, because that just leads to politics, and then the advice process becomes more difficult.
When you've come to the end of the receiving advice, it's time to obviously reach the decision, and when you've done that, you should communicate to everybody that you consulted. Because if you remember, the people that you consult are the people who are going to be impacted, so obviously it's courteous to make sure that anyone who's going to be impacted by the decision is informed. But if you've gone to experts as well who aren't being impacted, again, it's a good courtesy just to say, thanks for your advice, and this is what I've decided to do. You don't have to explain your reasoning, but if you're asked by anybody, you should be prepared to, right? That's something that we should all be prepared to do for any decision that we make. Act on it and deal with any consequences, and that's particularly, you know, if anything goes wrong, it's your responsibility to deal with it. That doesn't mean that you have to deal with it personally. You can seek support or advice from other people, but if it was your decision, then the responsibility rests with you. Yeah, every decision is the business's decision, so we need to unite behind it and regard it, you know, and work with it. And I think that's like there's a concept in holacracy, which is this idea of safe to try. So holacracy have a much more rigid decision-making process, kind of company-wide decisions are made in governance meetings, which happen every week or every month or something. but the format that they have is that somebody will come with a proposal and say, well, this is what I want to do. And people can only raise objections to that by saying, well, you know, I don't think this would be safe to try. So the concept is saying, you know, okay, you might not like this decision. This might not be the decision that you would have made under these circumstances. But is the company going to burn down, you know, if we try this? And if it isn't going to burn down if we try it, then, you know, can you support it at least for a time to try it, bearing in mind that no decision is ever permanent. Right? Decisions can always be changed by another decision at some point in the future. But what we do say is if you're making a decision that explicitly changes a previous decision, you should, as a courtesy, go and consult all the people who were consulted on the original decision. You know, because you know, if I decide, well, okay, I want to seek advice and say, okay, we should buy product A, then I've obviously had advice that's made that seem like the best option to me. So if you're like, well, actually, I really disagree with that, I think we should go for product B, you should go and check with all the people again, because they gave me advice that led to me. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, this is deliberate. I think this is covered in the later slides. What to do if you disagree.
Well,
is it? It is here. Okay. So there's a deliberate bias there towards allowing decisions to be made. So previously we had said something like, you make a decision by the enterprise process, and if you disagree, have a resolution meeting with the person who made the decision. That is no longer the way it works, and it's the reason why it should not be the way it works is because it gives, in a very green way, it gives everybody the power to stop other people from making decisions. Because all you need to stop somebody from making a decision is to have an objection and therefore start a resolution process with them. We are deliberately having a bias towards decisions being made. You can still change a decision, but it is at least as much effort as it was to make the decision in the first place. It should not be expensive to make decisions and really cheap to stop them. That's not a good way for the system to operate.
Oh yeah, okay. So I think it's worth recapping, having kind of gone through the process. That obviously we know that like freedom and trust underlie a lot of what we do, and they underlie open culture. So it's important that we work with those. But there also needs to be clarity about who's making the decision, what the decision is being made, who advice is being sought from, what advice is being given. Transparency, not just in the process, but across the business. If we want everybody to be able to make any decision, that's one of the reasons why we have to have transparency of everything that's going on, because people need to have the full picture. Right? Everybody needs to have as much information as CEO. And there also needs to be curiosity. There needs to be a willingness to learn. If you're going out with an advice process, if your mind is closed, then what's the point in, you know, going out for advice and seeking other people's opinions? So we need those things to make it work, and those opposites are things that will stand in the way. So if you spot any of the opposites, you should be challenging them. So coercion, fear, ambiguity, secrecy, and closed-mindedness. I think there are some open questions, which I've just kind of listed at the end. I don't have clear answers. So some questions that I think that it's interesting to consider, right? How do you know if you're making a good decision? You know, like, what's the process? Are the boundaries on this? Should you be, you know, how do you consider your interests, the business interests? Should we always be considering the needs of colleagues, customers, suppliers, values, purpose? Like, all of this seems to come together, and we need to think about that sort of thing. Do decisions need to be tracked? And if they do, why? And which decisions and how? Do we need to make time to reflect on the decisions that we've made and the impact they had? Is that a useful practice? And if so, how do we make that happen? And, you know, for the advice process so far, what in our experience has been working and what hasn't, and which are the areas that we feel we need more clarity on?
I just had one more point about bad decisions, wrong decisions rather, not bad decisions, wrong decisions. One natural fear that people might have is, but what if somebody makes the wrong decision? Well, newsflash, people make the wrong decision. People make wrong decisions in business all the time. This already happens, but what happens far more often than making wrong decisions is not making any decision at all, because the whole company is kind of seized up in a kind of indecision process. And my belief as an entrepreneur is that it's much more damaging to not make any decisions than it is to make wrong decisions. Andrew and I had an interesting chat last night about what about decisions that could burn the company down. And this is not a challenge, by the way. I really dug through like what decisions have been made in the last year or so since we've had the advice process, and I couldn't think of a single one that had anywhere near the potential to burn the house, burn the business down, without many chances for people to say like, wait a minute, like, you know, we need to do something about this before the decision will actually be totally implemented. So I don't think, so obviously I'm not suggesting that people should not consider whether it's going to burn the business down before they make a decision, but I think the fear that somebody might make a decision that means that we're all out of work tomorrow is greatly overstated, if that fear exists. It's actually not a very realistic prospect. So what's more realistic is that we keep fearing making decisions, therefore we don't make any decisions, and eventually, slowly but surely, we do burn the business down because the rest of the world moves faster than us. So yeah, that's a point worth making about wrong decisions. So don't feel afraid to make wrong decisions. It will happen. Try not to, obviously, do your best. It's your responsibility. You have to deal with the fallout if you make a wrong decision. But like, don't let the fear of sometimes making a mistake stop you from making decisions.
So hopefully most of that stuff about how it works is not kind of news to anybody. It should be familiar, but it's, you know, as we were saying earlier, it's worth kind of bringing it all together and restating explicitly. It's all on the hub. So this is just a summary of the stuff that's on the hub in the format of an FAQ, so it's nice and easy to read, hopefully. And yeah,
I'd say there's more of an FAQ. It's we've targeted the constitutional core on the hub, and the idea is to have a fairly succinct, summarized version of this that people can refer back to, because you don't want to watch what is probably about a half-hour video every time you have a question or you want to double-check something about the advice process or other processes. So trying to accrue those things into a kind of constitutional core that you can use to refer back to say, like, well, hold on, how is this actually done? So that's what we'll put on the hub, rather than just an FAQ.
Yeah, it's in the, sure. Questions, discussion, comments, thoughts, changes?
I just want to bring, it's more of a discussion about kind of the disagreement in the advice process and how we want to always kind of lean towards being able to make decisions rather than like not making a decision. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I want to talk about is what happens when someone makes a decision that impacts you directly that you disagree with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what happens then? Like how is that supposed to resolve the unsettled feelings and unhappy feelings that you're kind of being coerced into doing something in a way?
Right. So so you're impacted by the decision, so you've been consulted and you've offered your advice, but you don't agree with the decision. Yeah. That's true.
And the decision is making you do something, is requiring you to do something specific. I think that the view I take is what we're trying to do is give everybody the power to move the company forward. Now, bear in mind that, as you said, all decisions are temporary. It's not like you're being forced to do this thing that you don't disagree with forever. You're being forced to give it a good try. I would argue that it's a worthy trade-off to occasionally do something that you disagree with, which has been done, like where the decision has been made by following this advice process, which creates all this power for everybody, including yourself. It's worth surrendering that power to enable the advice process to function. Because the alternative is that you say, well, I give advice negative to that and I disagree, therefore I'm not going to do it, and I don't stand behind the decision, I'm going to refuse to do it. And that destroys the ability of the advice process to make any decisions that involve anybody other than the decision maker.
So in some ways, being able to make any decision that you want comes with advice that you could potentially have to sacrifice yourself, like temporarily speaking.
Yeah, and doing the analogy with democracy, you know, knowing that everybody else is going to follow the law means that you also have to follow the law, and that is a restriction of your freedom. But if you don't have that restriction on your freedom, you can't sleep at night knowing that there's a restriction on somebody else's freedom to break into your house, steal your stuff, and kill you in your bed or something. So extreme. No, but yeah, that is a feature of a free country, that, you know, there is this restriction on your freedom, which also means that you actually get to enjoy your freedom rather than not?
I mean, I think it's also important that if, you know, if this decision is, if like implementing this decision is going to make you really unhappy every day, then that's quite a big piece of information to the person who's making the decision for them to kind of bear in mind. So, you know, I would say, okay, if somebody makes a decision where that's the case, then it's like, well, I would definitely, the first step would be talk to that person and clarify it and make sure that they understand the impact that it's going to have on you, because maybe they haven't understood it. And if they have understood it, like again, coming back to, you know, communicating to people whose advice you're not taking. If you said, look, if we start working on this thing this way, it's going to make me unhappy because this, you know, this is the kind of thing that I know makes me unhappy, then if I was making a decision, I would want to actually, having had that advice from you, to say to you, look, I've heard that advice, but I really think that there are compelling reasons for us to do this anyway. You know, so although it's difficult, is it something that you could be willing to work with, or is there some way that we could do it? Right? Because although we say it's not a consensus process, you don't have to bring, you know, everything involved. Like, you know, we say we're not a leader-less organisation, we're a leader-full organisation. We have to be good leaders. So if people under us are saying we're doing this, it's going to make me unhappy, then we have a responsibility to, you know, to try and help with that, I think.
So I was just going to say though, I think there's a related point which it would be good for you guys to speak to, which is, I think the flip side of that is that we've seen decisions where the bulk of people were happy with the thing, and then not that statement of actually this is going to make you really unhappy, which would be quite kind of rational and you can work through that, but sort of that tacit resistance and disengagement that you get, which is typical of change management in big organisations. So basically that, you can't really engage with that because you can't address the problem with that. And if people just kind of disengage from stuff that frankly they think is nonsense or a decision that they don't agree with, how do we bring that back as an organisation? And you know, we've talked about that kind of divide before, and that's, I think, at the heart of that. How do we bring that disengagement back?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, that's why it's really important to have the principle that every decision, once it's made, is the business's decision. So you know, you should be prepared to unite behind it. And if you're not doing, then that's a breach of the constitution. That's a breach of the way that we run as a self-managing organisation. So it's reasonable if somebody is like putting up that kind of resistance to a decision to call it out and to say, oh, can we have a chat about this? Because there was a decision that I made the other week, which was that we would do things in this way. And I've noticed that you haven't said to me that this is a particular problem for you. You haven't raised anything. But it does seem to me that you're not really doing things in this way now, and I wonder, you know, what's going on there, because that's the decision we've made.
Just before we jump in, I'd just like to point out that although certainly we are a complex organisation in a number of ways, hopefully we'll not reach the sort of depths of inertia that the whole department will have, you know, with tens of thousands of people who just don't want to change at all. And hopefully we can actually handle the one-to-one conversation, say like, hey, like, you know, can I get, why do you need to get behind this and actually make the change happen on a scale of 25 people?
Building on that, at Heard to Run with last week, I did a trust with Zoe, who I think her mechanism of running the advice process was for the decision maker to sit in the middle of the room and for everyone to understand the proposal and then say, have you considered? And if anyone had a reservation, the mechanism for feedback, going back to where you're coming from, was have you considered a mechanism for trial period and trial length of time and exit strategy. So you would say, okay, well, you come to some sort of agreement. If it hasn't paid off or delivered X, Y, or Z within a certain time period, then we will revisit the decision. So that's built into the process, and it gives you some way of redress if not all elements have been satisfied.
Yeah, so there's the...
Which I thought was quite a reasonably sound way.
It includes this concept that, you know, decisions are not permanent.
And the person that had objection actually had an input to the decision and the way out.
That's it.
So for me, I know that's like it's a great thing, but then there's obviously still some grey areas. So how do you manage that grey area? Say, for example, yeah, as I mentioned before, to what extent does one need to actually seek advice? Because one person might make a decision thinking they've actually sought enough advice, and then another person could be like, well, hang on, well, why didn't I get sort of, and then... So how do you sort of manage that and sort of get?
So in the constitutional report, we've written the 4 different things that can happen after a decision, 4 different behaviors that are reasonable after a decision. One of them is if you feel like you should have been consulted and you weren't consulted, is to approach the person, and the person should give you the time to say, like, to allow you to provide your advice. And they are free to change their decision after you provide your advice, but you should not try to coerce them or pressure them into changing their advice. You're not changing their decision, you're just providing them with new advice that may or may not change the decision.
Yeah, and then if it was too late, then it's too late, I guess.
So too late, as I said, all decisions can be reversed. Obviously there's some decisions with permanent consequences.
Yeah.
It is the responsibility of the decision maker to consider that when they're making a decision with permanent consequences, like do we send an offer letter to this person, they should, you know, do the extra due diligence to really try and get and not miss out on any kind of essential piece of feedback, yeah, because the decision has permanent consequences. Or another mechanism is for them to pre-announce the decision before they actually enact the permanent consequences of it. Like, I'm going to send an offer letter tomorrow morning, you know, speak now, or, you know, after that I've sent the offer letter, we can't really retract it after sending it.
So I mean, it's important to give feedback and say, hey, I think I should have been, you know, consulted for this on this decision. Yeah. But then, how do you do it in a way that it doesn't, you know, have that blame sort of tension?
So you just say, I'm like, you can say either I'm not sure whether my feedback was heard. If you did provide feedback and you don't feel like it was heard, that's totally fine. As long as you do so respectfully with the clear acknowledgement that it is that person's decision. So you can say, hey, like, I just want to make sure that you heard this feedback that I had. So I just wanted to approach you personally to go through it, just to make sure that you've heard this. Or you can also ask for, like, to understand their reasoning, which you might say, well, I disregard your feedback because X, Y, Z. If you didn't get a chance to provide feedback, you can also just approach with fresh feedback that they hadn't had before. What you can't do is say, well, I don't really agree with your decision, I think you need to stop it. That's not...
I'm just saying, the worst case scenario, let's say the decision's been made, it's irreversible, and then you haven't been consulted for that decision. I guess that's just the worst case scenario, isn't it?
It will happen, but if the choice between that and decisions rarely happen, or happen much more rarely, and tend to be slowed down by weeks and stuff, it's probably better that sometimes decisions get made that you didn't manage to get as much involvement into as you wanted, rather than all decisions slow down dramatically.
I mean, so it's important to raise if you think, you know...
There is a responsibility on the decision maker if they think that somebody's advice is going to be very relevant. So to actually make sure they seek advice from that person. Like, for example, if somebody was going to make changes to the calculation spreadsheet, and they send an email to the team and you haven't replied because you're busy or whatever, maybe you're off that day or you're sick, etc.
Yeah.
And they just go ahead and make the decision without consulting you, they haven't really sought proper feedback on something that is your area of expertise there. Yeah. So they should make the effort to try and approach you and say, like, hey, like, you know, can I get 10 minutes of your time to do this? Specifically because you happen to be very connected to that topic.
Yeah, so the idea is then if you sort of observe potential failure of the advice process, it's really important to flag that with the person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. In the best way possible, but obviously you can't do it with the blame thing.
And it's important to note that, so we've got these weekly meetings where we're going to discuss and clarify and discuss in groups and to present the ideas. Not everybody likes to read documents and so on, but we do have also a written document version of this, the constitutional core. And there will be one-to-ones, Andrew Wedding will be having weekly one-to-ones with everybody, and that is also a channel where you can discuss if you feel like something's not being implemented quite right, or is somebody's in breach, or something you want to be able to raise that. You have those channels, you have those tools at your disposal to identify problems and raise them. And the solution should be either that we change the constitutional core and we change what we discuss here, or the person aligns their behavior with the way that we say we're operating here. What we don't want to have is we say we're operating this way, and then kind of some of the company operates this way, some doesn't, some does something completely in conflict, etc. We want to. This is a process kind of like the rule of law. You need everybody to operate by this process rather than just optionally jump into it.
How do we advertise that we're starting the advice process? I mean, obviously there's email, chat, all of that, but is a more visible channel, whether it's a board on the wall somewhere, if someone's thinking of starting the advice process, to feel like a planning application?
I mean, for me, I think it's about the fact that, you know, that gathering advice is an active process, right? It's not, I think at the moment we conceive it that the advice sort of comes to you, you know, but it's actually you have to go to the advice.
The way we start the process is somebody decides that they need to make a decision. Maybe that decision only needs to consult the person who's sitting right next to them, in which case the advice process can be over and done with in about 10 seconds. But it is the responsibility of the person making the decision to think through the impact and the scope of the decision, whether they need more advice and so on, because they are responsible for the decision, its fallout and so on, and they therefore naturally want to make the best decision possible. That is part of, like, how you advertise the decision, whether you advertise the decision and so on, is kind of part of your decision process. If you need more feedback, you probably need to let more people know that you're making a decision.
I mean, the beauty of it is you can seek advice on that. You know, you could be like, oh, I'm trying to make a decision about this. Who do you think I should talk to?
Do you think I should send an email to the team? Do you think I should...
Yeah, I mean, that was it, you know, either you seek advice or you put up, I mean, obviously it's line, you either seek advice or you say that you're going to make a decision and invite it. And you can get people that are also interested, but also people that are relevant.
I've had some great, quite good success in kind of assessing the impact on it, and then, as I suggested, a kind of multiple approach. So, yeah, just kind of scoping out what kind of level is needed, and then kind of following a bit of a kind of talk to some people in there, and so I've got a good base to start from. Yeah. Just, as I said, it's just whether it's going to go rapid or not, to be honest.
Yeah, it is your responsibility. So it's what you said, like, you just advertise, you're going to make a decision, and let the feedback come to you. The advice is something that you're seeking out of curiosity, out of wanting to make the best decision. It is your responsibility to seek out that advice. It's not like, in some cases, it might be appropriate to say, in fact, in many cases, it might be appropriate to say, I'm thinking of making this decision, what's your advice? But ultimately, you're still the person who's seeking advice. It's not, you've made people aware that you're making a decision, and therefore, if they don't reply, tough luck, you're still going to make the decision. It's for you that the advice is there to help you, not to constrain you. So always think about whether you need more advice to make the decision, rather than have I made it widely known enough. No, you want as much advice as you can, because that way you make a better decision. Yeah.
Are there any limitations in terms of what decisions can be made? As we found in the past, advice on wages and stuff was something that we could go into with the advice model.
So I have a kind of a witty answer to this, which is no, but my advice would be that at the moment I would stay away from decisions about pay and stuff like that, because they are known to be interesting. However, there's no reason why the advice process can't be applied to pay decisions. We have a model right now that's working better than the way we tried to apply the advice process more than 9 months ago for pay, but that's not to say that the advice process can't apply to pay. Again, that's a point in the future. That it? Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you.